If June has taught us anything, it's that streaming shows don't have to suck. Shows like The Bear and House of the Dragon have been crushing among fans, and maybe The Acolyte can learn something from these two fantastic shows. The Acolyte has not been widely loved by fans, stirring up controversy left and right, and one of the main criticisms about the show is its lack of good writing, its storytelling being completely subpar. And you don't have to look very far to see examples of amazing storytelling that I wish The Acolyte would learn from. Because there are TV shows being produced and made, put right to streaming, that are phenomenal. The Bear is one of those shows, possibly one of my favorite shows right now, because of the way it goes about telling story and immersing the audience into the emotions of what's happening. Just take a look at the opening 30 seconds of this show. The train, the water, the buildings. We are reminded of how lonely a profession it can be to be a chef, waking up when no one else is awake and going in when no one else is awake, and you're there by yourself. And that's the show. For the first 13, 14 minutes, there are virtually no words spoken. So how do you communicate a story without words? You show it. You show facial expressions. You use music and noises and experiences to talk about and show what has been happening. And this whole beginning of the show really pulls us into the character of Carmy. It lets us see things the way that he sees them, the way he obsesses over food. How did he get to this point? Instead of someone exposition dumping and just telling us about his backstory, this is a beautiful way to bring us to the place of identifying with him, of feeling with him, and seeing what's happening as the show progresses. We get this kind of whole backstory of all the different ways that he's learned how to cook, the different places he's been at, the sacrifices he's made, the family he's lost, the relationships he's lost, the love that has been broken. We get all of that without virtually any lines of dialogue. Now take for a moment, Imagine with me, if you will, that instead of what we've gotten with The Acolyte, we got storytelling like this. What if The Acolyte, instead of beginning this way,
attack me with all your strength.
Man, it's still so cringe. I just can't even. But imagine instead if the show opened up with May as the mechanic, with May in her bunks alone. And then all of a sudden we're getting these moments interspersed. She's alone. It's music. There's no dialogue. And it's going back to younger her being trained in the temple, her relationship with Soul. Then it even flashes back in and forth to some of her early relationship with her mothers in the witch coven, and you're getting all of this story interweaved. We don't necessarily have to yet see that she's a twin. You can keep that hidden, but it's going in and out, this montage of training, showing her failing, showing her connection to the Jedi, showing all of these things building and building and building. We start to get pulled in with the character. We get an understanding and a relationship that all of a sudden comes as a result without using words, because we're actually telling story. I think one of the weakest ways to tell story is when someone tells the character they're talking to about their own history. It's so lazy. It's just lazy writing. There's so many interesting and awesome ways you can go about showing the audience and telling the audience what we need to know without just saying it. But the beauty of a show like The Bear is it doesn't stay here. Like these first 13 minutes were relaxing and calm and sad and pulling us in. And then you jump to the second episode.
Nonsense. Okay,
the four tops in the
I
first
moved
place,
the
dog.
flowers because
You
Jesus
added the four
Christ,
tops
that
in
was
the
a lot of
first place.
flowers.
Guys, those
and I
flowers
said I'm
are
sorry,
elegant
but
as
and you're screaming.
Am I?
Yeah, you are.
Oh, yeah, that
Is it rich? Is it rich, Richard?
You want to get out of my
rich?
And
face,
you
Carmen?
both shut the up, please.
There's more F-bombs than I can even count because they're just going at each other in the kitchen. It reminded me of the Christmas episode where it was just like anxiety inducing, intense. And when I looked over to my wife, she's like, that was it? That felt like 10 minutes. It was the whole episode. And we were just so there. You felt like you were in the kitchen in one place, but they'd spent the time the previous episode setting it all up and showing this chaotic difference of the loneliness, of the sadness, of the training, of the time, of the obsessiveness of Carmi. And then you step into the kitchen and the chaos of everything else going on. And people don't see it the same way he does. They don't see his non-negotiables being the same. That is beautiful storytelling and the expanse of emotion and pulling the people into the show. I'm just supposed to show up to the Acolyte and like it because it's Star Wars, because of the logo at the beginning, because I see a lightsaber early on. That's just lazy. We need good writing. But that's just in a realistic TV show like The Bear that's looking at a kitchen in Chicago. What if we went to the world of fantasy and jumped over to House of the Dragon?
Now I find myself in an impossible position.
Another show with a similar budget to Acolyte. Longer run times, and they're on their third season already. They're not on the third season, second season. So let's hop over to House of the Dragon, a fantasy show with a similar budget to The Acolyte. They open their second season in a very interesting way because they're trying to tell many stories from many angles, kind of like The Acolyte, except they really do a good job of building these characters and letting these characters grow and help us understand them by their emotion and their experiences, not just telling us about the story, but using other characters in really interesting ways to give us more information. And there's something specific that happens in House of the Dragon that really helps us get into the show. And it's really a lot of the way that the camera work is done. Even as we start at the beginning, we start with a wide shot, much like in The Acolyte, where we're following this raven. And where is this raven going? This raven is going to Winterfell. Now, if you don't watch the show, that may not mean much to you, but just follow the way that it goes. Follow this path. We're getting the epic music. We're getting the expanse of the world building. And then we land here at the castle with a conversation continuing where things had left off the previous season. And we're getting a dialogue underneath this music, underneath these visuals, kind of reminding us of the grandeur and the history that is a part of this story.
The North owes a great duty to the Seven Kingdoms, one older than any oath.
We're not just hopping into a random place in time. We're joining a grand epic story as it's unfolding. This is all foreshadowing. It's a prequel to what we know is coming in the Song of Ice and Fire, that winter is coming. And so we see the wall, we see the Night's Watch, we see all of this, and we know what will eventually be.
Do you think my ancestors built a 700-foot wall of ice to keep out snow and savages? What does it keep out? Death.
This show actually is a great comparison to The Acolyte because it is a prequel to something. We know what's coming after The Acolyte, and so House of the Dragon is trying to set up really well. Now, there's a lot more time between House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones, unlike The Acolyte and the prequel trilogy, and partly that's one of the things I wish they had done differently. I wish they had gotten further away from the prequel trilogy and given us something in a different place. That's exactly what House of the Dragon did. Now, yes, they have a source material that they're working off of, But so does Star Wars. Star Wars has more source material that you could work off of. Whether or not it's canon or not, you have something there to work with. It doesn't have to be all of this original stuff. And we see some of the things make its way into the Acolyte. But as we begin this episode with House of the Dragon, we're brought into the story in different places, all engaging it from different perspectives and getting each a little bit more from those characters. The stakes are made real. This feels huge and massive. The dragons that we see right off the bat pull us in. Kind of like it's okay to use lightsabers to pull in if that's what people love, but they're not the main thing. They're just part of the story. They're the thing that looms over the whole entire Game of Thrones universe as you're talking about the possibility of war. It's been building and building and building to that. Then in the show, we find that this raven that we started with actually was bringing horrible news, that the death of his brother has now happened. Of course, we already knew that as a show, but just because we knew that, we want to see the story unfold with each of these characters, how they react, how they live this out, and it builds the story. It brings us into these characters. And then we jump back to Dragonstone because Dragonstone is mentioned. And so we fly back to get a picture of what's happening. And we get a behind the scenes look of the tension and the turmoil and the problem that is brewing with Daemon.
Was this the Queen's command?
The Queen remains absent. I should be at Harrenhal bending knees, but I must instead remain here to wage her war.
Or perhaps more simply, to await her return.
She has been gone for days. Too long. She is exposed.
She is grieving.
The mother grieves as the Queen shirks her duties. Fly with me. It is a command.
Would that you were the king.
That we had known about, but we are getting a deeper picture into, and that's really going to be one of the main threads of this story as it continues, is the problem of Daemon's own pride and his own desire for power and his desire for war and his bloodthirstiness, and contrast that against what is trying to happen and with Rhaenyra trying to stop war and find a way for peace while everyone else in the realm is going to fight. But she's grieving, and so that we don't even see her. She's one of the main characters, and we don't see her at the beginning point. Instead, we're getting this building of the world around her so that when we eventually make it to her, we have felt that absence, we have felt that miss, and all of it is building because she's a grieving mom who's trying to figure out how to lead this as a queen at the same time. Notice the passion and the emotion and the building, and they use different ways, different camera angles, different story angles to come all about this so that we're learning, but we're not learning through exposition, we're learning through conversation. They don't just tell us about what's happened, we're learning about motivations, we're learning about the heart and the desires and the conflict and the loneliness and the challenges as they have these conversations. All of these motives build and build and build and clash amongst one another in a grand opera of showing the political struggle behind all of this possible war breaking out. It actually is a lot like the prequel trilogy in the way that grand epic of fighting back and forth politically and the war that's happening, that's coming, and all of these types of things. The Acolyte could totally live into that same space. We could get information through conversation, not just through dialogue dump exposition monologues.
Major concern about admitting you to the order was your age.
And the fact that you were mourning.
My circumstances were unique, but the Jedi Council made their decision.
You lost your entire family. Your mothers, your sister, your village all died in the fire before Master Soul brought you into the Jedi. Your training was difficult, to say the least. Attachments to those we have lost are the most difficult to let go.
Imagine if instead of the way that the show opened, if Acolyte had opened just like House of the Dragon, had opened giving us this grand scale foreshadowing what's coming. There's something looming in the distance. Notice how vague Game of Thrones can be, and a lot of what has happened in Acolyte is very vague, but that's okay if the vagueness is building towards something that is actually interesting, or building towards something that is known about by most fans far in the distance. So you can foreshadow something thousands of years in the future because fans are bought in. Imagine if Acolyte did some of that. Instead of just trying to force us to love these characters, help us learn about them and join into the story. And that's the main difference between what happens in The Bear, what happens in House of the Dragon, and what happens in Acolyte. Two of those stories draw us in and really help us feel the emotions of what's happening. The other just misses the mark. Time after time, it feels cheap. It feels lazy. The storytelling just really isn't there. And they give us cliffhangers that really don't always land. I don't think there's anything wrong with cliffhangers. Look at these other two shows. They do it very well, but it's a different way. It's a different type. They're really pulling us in and bringing about the imagination. Whereas the Acolyte just exists and says, hey, we're going to be vague. We're going to just tell you the story. We're not going to be really that creative with how we do it. We're going to give some reveals right at the beginning that there's no payoff that we're waiting for. The whole show is built to what actually happened 16 years ago, and too many people have tuned out by now because you haven't really foreshadowed anything grand or epic, and that's what Star Wars is. The best Star Wars is these big tales and narratives that pull in different characters, and that we start to love these characters, that we still care about these characters, and that when these characters die, which that's something that's great that the Acolyte has done, we actually care because we've gotten some of that story. Not just exposition, but emotion and creativity and cinematography. These things that are beautiful. Now, some people are going to push back and say, that's not really what Star Wars is about. And I would disagree. I think what happened in the original trilogy was about characters, was about epic stories, was about stories that we were drawn into because we could see ourselves in those stories. There was something so familiar about Luke and Han and Leia and Lando. There was something so familiar about these characters, about even the droids R2 and C-3PO, yet it was in another galaxy far, far away. It felt familiar, but yet far. We could escape to that place, but there was something about it that felt like coming home. And that's what great storytelling does. It makes you feel like you're sitting down on your couch, you're sitting in the environment, and you're immersed into the story. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe The Acolyte has done that for you. It has not for me. But these other shows absolutely have. The Bear and the House of the Dragon are masterpieces, I believe, in storytelling. And I wish Disney would start doing what these other companies are doing. Hire better writers, hire better directors. You can do more. You have a bigger budget, you have more money, you can do more than all of these other studios. So why is it the same? At this point, you have to agree when you step back that the problem comes from the top. It's the way that they go about this, the way that they give direction, the way that they line all this up that makes me just go, nothing they're going to make is going to be that good. It just isn't until they change what they're doing.